You know, it's wild to think about, but imagine your body isn't just a collection of organs and bones. Instead, think of it as a bustling, high-speed telecommunications network, a system where billions of cells are constantly texting, emailing, and calling each other every single second of the day, just to keep you functioning, growing, and reacting to the world around you. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are bringing some incredible source material to life to decode the precise, invisible language of our endocrine signals. It is absolutely fascinating to see how this internal network operates. I promise you'll never look at a sudden bout of fatigue or a random food craving the exact same way again. So here is our game plan for this explainer. We're going to hit the body's chemical network, look at some really surprising hormone sources, figure out what happens when the system fails, decode those tricky endocrine symptoms, and finally, dive into the diagnostic detective work. Okay, let's jump right into part one, the body's chemical network, our invisible system. To really get why things glitch, we have to understand the baseline infrastructure first. When you hear the word hormone, I bet you instantly think of like puberty or those giant dusty biology textbooks. But honestly, they are so much more than just static chemicals. Hormones are the actual products of your endocrine organs. Think of them as this incredibly active, integrated network of regulatory signals. They're literally the texts, the emails, and the broadcast signals that seamlessly connect your endocrine, nervous, and immune systems. It's the ultimate language of intercellular communication. And what's super fascinating is the range on these signals. It's exactly like our digital devices. You've got autocrine signals, which act right at the cell of origin. It's kind of like leaving a digital sticky note on your own computer desktop. Insulin and leptin do this. Then there's paracrine. These act on nearby cells. Think of that as airdropping a photo to a friend sitting right next to you. Gastrin in your gut works exactly like that. And finally, endocrine signals. These act at far sites. This is your global broadcast, like a giant radio tower blasting a signal across your entire body. Hormones like oxytocin and dopamine absolutely rely on this long-range network. Moving right along to part two, surprising hormone sources, way beyond the classics. So if hormones are the signals, where exactly are the cell towers? Well, the classic setup features the traditional players. You've got the pituitary gland up in the brain, that butterfly-shaped thyroid sitting in your neck, and the adrenals resting right on top of your kidneys. If you took high school bio, these are for sure the heavy hitters you remember learning about. But as we dig into the source material, there's this massive paradigm shift happening in modern medicine. Turns out this network is way wider than we thought. We have non-traditional glands totally getting in on the action. Your GI tract is producing hormones like ghrelin to manage hunger. Your central nervous system is literally pumping out peptide hormones. But get this, the absolute most surprising one? Adipose tissue. Yep. Fat. Fat isn't just this inert stuff storing extra energy, it's an active, hormone-producing organ, firing off powerful signals, like leptin, to regulate your metabolism. It's a real game changer. And because of discoveries exactly like this, new hormones are now classified by what they actually do, their function, not just where they come from. All right, part three, when the system fails. So what actually happens when this beautifully precise telecommunications network starts glitching or, dropping calls? Let's look at the pathology. When someone gets sick, doctors categorize the chaos into specific communication failures. First up, we've got hormone excess. This is literally like a spammer completely flooding your inbox. It can be caused by neoplastic growth, like benign tumors, or autoimmune issues like Graves' disease, where antibodies actually mimic a signal and trick the body into overproducing. Then you have hormone deficiency. That's basically a dead battery, total primary gland failure. Or sometimes the target organ itself just becomes incredibly hypersensitive to the messages. But here's an absolutely crucial concept to wrap our heads around: functional resistance. This is a defect in hormone action even when the hormone levels are super high. Going back to our phone analogy, this is a blocked number. The signal is blasting at maximum volume, but the receiving cell is essentially put on noise-canceling headphones. The body is completely ignoring it. The texts are sending, but they just aren't being read. The source notes that common acquired forms of this are insulin resistance, which we know drives type 2 diabetes, and leptin resistance, which is heavily tied to obesity. Which brings us to part four, decoding endocrine symptoms. If those internal texts aren't going through, how on earth do we know? Let's pivot to the clinical side. It is fascinating to see exactly what doctors are up against here because reading these dropped calls is tough. Patients don't just walk into a clinic and say, "Hey doc, my paracrine signals are misfiring today." No way. They come in with really vague, diffuse symptoms. Lethargy and depression. Well, that could be a sluggish thyroid, diabetes, or maybe Cushing syndrome. Sudden weight loss? Could be thyrotoxicosis or adrenal insufficiency. It's an intense matching game. The doctor has to take everyday complaints like feeling super tired, being unquenchably thirsty, or suddenly hating the heat, and trace them all the way back to a highly specific glitch in the network. So, part 5, the diagnostic detective work. We know the symptoms are diffuse, so how do doctors actively troubleshoot this invisible network in the real world? How do you fix a machine when you literally can't see the gears turning? It comes down to a really strict step-by-step diagnostic procedure. Step 1 is medical and family history taking, hunting for clues like a family history of autoimmune diseases or looking closely at previous surgeries. Step 2 is the physical examination. They're checking your demeanor, your voice, or skin changes, like thinning or excess hair. Then, and only then, do they move to Step 3, biochemical testing, which is finally followed by Step 4, radiologic imaging. And listen, if you take away just one medical rule from this entire explainer, let it be this golden rule. Straight from the text, biochemical testing precedes imaging to establish hormonal dysfunction. You absolutely, 100% must prove that the signal is broken using biochemistry before you ever think about taking a picture of the cell tower with an MRI, a CT scan, or an ultrasound. You can't just photograph the hardware, right? You have to test the software first. And how exactly do they test that software? Through active troubleshooting. Doctors essentially become IT professionals using two main strategies. If they suspect hyperfunction, that excess spamming we talked about, they'll use a suppression test. They give the body something like dexamethasone to see if they can force the system to silence the spammer. But if they suspect hypofunction, a dead battery, they use a stimulation test, like the ACTH test, to try and kickstart the system and see if it can still generate a signal at all. But the medical IT department has to be incredibly precise, because different signals behave very differently. Hormones like cortisol, ACTH, and testosterone have really short half-lives. Their levels are bouncing up and down rapidly all day long, so they require highly specific protocols, like forcing a patient to do a midnight salivary cortisol test. On the flip side, hormones with long half-lives, like your thyroid hormones T4 and T3, barely vary at all over time. For those, a random blood sample pulled at, say, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday is perfectly valuable. The test literally has to match the behavior of the chemical. So we've seen how vast, intricate, and insanely sensitive this network truly is. From fat cells sending metabolic text messages to the precise stimulation tests doctors use to troubleshoot dropped calls. Every single day, your body manages billions of these messages to keep you perfectly balanced. But remember, it's not a closed loop, which leaves us with a really critical question to reflect on. Knowing that things like your fat cells and your gut are active broadcasters, how might your daily habits, like your diet, your stress levels, and your sleep, be sending unintended spam messages across your very own internal endocrine network? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, keep paying attention to those signals.